anniversary of my grandfather, late Honorable Chief Justice of India, Justice M.A. Punchhi. My name is Satyam Tandon, and I'm a practicing advocate at the Punjab and Haryana High Court, and I shall be your host for the event. I am pleased to welcome the speakers for today, the family of Justice Punchhi, and the numerous people watching this webinar. We shall begin by invoking the blessings of Lord Ganesha. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurumay Deva Sarvakareshu Sarvada. Today is a day to indulge in reminiscing the kind-hearted person that he was, celebrate the brilliant mind that gave us a unique and different way to understand the law, recollect his stories and anecdotes, and in essence, feel proud of knowing him and being associated with him. I still remember quoting a judgment during one of my jurisprudence presentations in law school, in which he quoted and explained a shlok from the Garur Puran to explain the right to self-preservation. Till date, I'm amazed at the clarity of thought with which he could draw parallels between the present situation and our scriptures, which is why, more than reminiscing, I hope that we can all strive to emulate the standards of knowledge, determination, and integrity exhibited by him during his entire life. As we all know, his story is vast and endless. His story is one which includes a rich and diverse practice as an advocate. His story is one which includes tackling a difficult criminal roster during a time when terrorism was at its peak and 2 attempts on his life were even made. His story is one which includes delivering various landmark judgments as the Chief Justice of India. But most importantly, his story is one which includes being a simple and loving son, husband, father, grandfather, and a good human being. I'd like to take this opportunity to quote my mother's article, Srimati Priya Tandon's, on him. She said that from being the lone boarder in a convent school at the tender age of 5 at a refugee camp in a post-partitioned India, from his erstwhile father to chairing the highest seat in judiciary as the Chief Justice of India, from being a farmer at heart and a judge by intellect, from being Maddi to his parents and Malord to the legal world, Justice Madan Mohan Punchhi had come a long way. And that long way has certainly been memorable. I'm sure that if he were here today, we would be celebrating at his home, cutting his cake, and he would definitely be singing his favorite song, Ke Sara Sara. What will be, will be. Without taking more time, I request Shri Ashu Mohan Punchhi, who is the recently appointed Public Prosecutor of Chandigarh and a distinguished advocate with a long-standing practice of 28 years, but most importantly, the son of Justice Punchhi, to speak a few words. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Satyam, a budding lawyer in the family. I bow in reverence and extend a very, very warm welcome to our distinguished panel of speakers, Honorable Mr. Justice J.S. Khehar, former Chief Justice of India, with whom my father, Justice Punchhi, has had a very, very long association. I thought that who would be better than him to address an August gathering of people and legal luminaries. And I'm sure Justice Khehar would speak about him when he addresses the gathering. I also extend a very warm welcome to Honorable Mr. Justice K.T. Thomas, who adorned the bench of the Honorable Supreme Court alongside my father, and for many years were on the bench together and delivered several landmark judgments. I also extend a very, very warm welcome to Honorable Mr. Justice N.K. Sodhi, with whom our family has had an association for 3 long years, 3 long generations, which I'm sure he will speak about. Today, 10/10/2020 is a very unique date. The day is unique for us too, as it marks the 87th birthday of my father. Times are unique too, because the entire world is afflicted with the coronavirus pandemic. It makes it unique for all of us because it enables us to make a paradigm shift as to the manner in which we are now leading our lives in a virtual world. It facilitated holding of this webinar to commemorate the memory of my father on his 87th birthday. Behind the holding of this webinar is the driving light and the force and the brain and the catalyst, my brother-in-law, Mr. Sanjay Tandon, to whom I express my extreme gratitude to enable this to happen. He has been a philanthropist and now dedicates his life to the service of society. He has been the president of the BJP for 10 long years in Chandigarh and virtually been the longest standing president in the entire country for a state unit. Today, he holds the august position of the member of the National Council. I'm extremely grateful and indebted to Sanjay for enabling this to happen. My father, Justice Punchhi, was born in a very small town called Pakpatan, which is now in Pakistan. At the tender age of 5, my grandfather sent him to boarding school in Amritsar. It was a convent school, and my father had many, many anecdotes and short stories to narrate to us when we were children, one of which I wish to share with you all because it left an indelible impression on my mind at least. He told us that one fine day at breakfast, when he was just 5 years old as a boarder in that school, apples were laid out for all the children to eat. So the moment he bit into the apple, it was very unsavory and he did not want to finish the apple. So Sister Declan, who was watching over him, said, "Madan, why aren't you eating your apple?" So he said, "Sister, if you don't mind, can I go outside and finish the apple? And I'd like to play with the other children, and I assure you that I will finish the apple when I'm out in the playground." The sister was not very pleased, but she allowed him to go. After 5 minutes, she wandered outside to see what was happening, and she noticed a crow perched on top of a tree, and the beak of the tree held the apple. So she called out to my father and she said that, "Madan, did you eat the apple?" He said, "Yes, sister." But then the stern look on her face said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Well, it was very unpalatable and therefore I threw it away." So my father narrates the story and she said that Sister Declan then told him, "Let me tell you, Madan, how an apple is created." So she tells him that there was once a gardener who planted a sapling on a hilltop. The sapling was very, very vulnerable and fragile, but the soil supported it. The sun beat down on the small sapling, but the gardener watered it to ensure that it got its feed. The gardener gave it manure. The gardener even fenced the small sapling with a barbed wire and made sure that the sapling turns into a tree with efflux of time. Thereafter, when the season came, flowers came on the tree. Hundreds and hundreds of flowers, however, fell down and perished, but a few survived and gradually transformed themselves into the fruit, to start with the size of a small pea. Eventually, the green pea grew in size and turned red, ripened as a fruit. Then came in the pickers with their trays. The fruit was plucked, placed neatly into trays. The trays were put into a wooden box. The wooden box were then transported and sent to several towns, including Amritsar, where a fruit seller got one of the boxes, and that's how Sister Declan was able to procure the apples and place it for all the children to eat. The story narrated by Sister Declan to my father left an indelible impression on his mind. Not only it made him love nature for what it showers on us as bounties, but also developed a fond likeness for agriculture, which he was a farmer at heart throughout his life. In the same breath, my father narrated to us another story. He says, while in boarding school, one fine day, he got greedy because when dinner was served on a cold winter night, one of his favorite dals was served for dinner. Being greedy, he took a double helping. The moment he took the first bite, he noticed that the dal was burned and he was just not ready to eat it. Again, Sister Declan stared down at him and said, Madan, why aren't you eating your food? He said, Sister Declan, the dal is burnt and I cannot eat it. She said, I would have let you go had you taken a normal helping. But since you are greedy to take 2 helpings, you will have to eat and finish the food. My father refused and he said, I am not going to eat it. I will sit here all night, but I will not eat it. 2 long hours were spent by Sister Declan sitting over him and reading the Bible while my father sat there fuming. Eventually, it started raining and it got colder and colder and colder. And then my father said, okay, Sister Declan, I will eat the food, but can you please have it warm for me? Which she did. And he then eventually finished eating the food. What he eventually told us was that you should only have enough on your plate and never be greedy. He taught us about how food comes on your plate and how God has his own plans to have every morsel and every grain of rice in your plate. And that's how he taught us never ever to waste food. Not a single morsel of food ever goes waste in our home. These are the small things which he has inculcated and imbibed in us as children. And we follow and his path and pass it on to our own children. My father eventually went to Jalandhar and obtained his graduation and thereafter graduated from the Delhi University after getting his degree in law. And thereafter went and joined his father's chambers in Ferozpur in the year 1955. My grandfather, late Shri Nandlal Punchhi, was also a practicing lawyer, essentially on the criminal side. But Ferozpur was a very small city and my father had higher dreams, as a consequence of which he moved to Chandigarh in the year 1958 and joined the chambers of late Honorable Mr. Justice N.K. Sodhi's father, which my Lord Justice Sodhi will detail when he speaks. Eventually, he was appointed as a public prosecutor in the year 1974 and was elevated to the bench of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in the year 1979. The journey as a judge in the High Court was not easy because, as we all know, Punjab was going through very troubled times. In 1985 and then in 1986, there were 2 attacks made upon his life in our residence, but God was kind and nobody went hurt. All this happening and the tumultuous manner in which life was proceeding then, my father thought that he might want to seek a transfer to Delhi where his 2 elder sisters and brother used to live. He requested the then Honorable Chief Justice of India if he could be transferred out from Chandigarh to Delhi, but he was unsuccessful. Then in the year 1989, one fine day, that is the 4th of October 1989, my father uncharacteristically came home from court at 11 a.m. in the morning. He never used to come home before 6 or 7 in the evening from court, but that day he came at 11 a.m. And he told me that, would you like to drive me to Delhi? And I said, what for? He said, the driver is on leave and I have to go to Delhi because the Chief Justice of India has asked me to come. And I said, why has the Chief Justice of India asked you to come? He says, I have no idea, but I have been asked to see him at 6 in the evening. So I drove him to Delhi, and on the way, he kept saying that I hope I'm not going to be transferred out now, because by then, both my sisters had gotten married. My elder brother, Amit, had moved to Canada to pursue higher studies. And I was the only child living with him at that point of time. Throughout the way, he was very scared of the fact that I hope I'm not going to be transferred anywhere, much less Delhi, because he was happy being in Chandigarh. When he reached the residence of the Chief Justice of India, Honorable Mr. Justice Venkatramaiah, at that point of time, the Chief Justice tells him, I hope you've got your robes along with you, Judge. And my father was perplexed and he said, what for? He says, don't you know that I'm swearing you in as the Judge of the Supreme Court day after tomorrow? My father was taken aback and said that throughout the way I was scared of the fact that I may not be transferred out. But it came as a matter of joy and pride to all of us that my father was being sworn in as a judge of the Honorable Supreme Court of India. 6th of October 1989, he was sworn in as the judge of the Honorable Supreme Court. The journey of a judge of the Supreme Court is never easy and comes with its pitfalls. He had the great support of many of his colleagues, especially Justice Thomas, who was with him through thick and thin and was a true friend right till the end. Eventually, he adorned the chair of the highest office one can dream of in the judiciary and assumed charge as the Chief Justice of India in January 1998, albeit with a few problems orchestrated by a few. He retired on 9/10/1998 and chose to come home to Chandigarh instead of staying on in Delhi. He had a choice. He could have stayed on in Delhi and established a lucrative arbitration practice, but he chose to come back because he wanted to be with his family. And by then he had several grandchildren. And he said, I do not want to miss out on my retiral years to spend time with my grandchildren. So he had his moments of joy with all the grandchildren and saw them grow up. And eventually in the year 2007, the central government approached him and requested him to head the Commission on Center-State Relations on account of the fact that the Sarkaria Commission report was already 20 years old, and with changing times, a revisit was required to look at center-state relations in the manner in which things were shaping up in the country. He was appointed as the chairperson of the commission with 4 other distinguished members, Mr. V.K. Duggal, Mr. Dhirendra Singh, who were secretaries to the Government of India, Honorable Dr. Madhav Menon, God bless his soul, and one Mr. Vijay Shankar, who was an IPS and director in the CBI as the member secretary. The commission eventually submitted its report in the year 2010 and gave as many as 312 recommendations. He touched various aspects of what the country was confronted with at that point of time, including communal violence, National Integration Council, spoke about Article 355 as to the role of the central government to give protection to the states in the event of external aggression, spoke about Article 356, where president's rule ought to have been imposed, not in the entire state, but only in limited areas, spoke about sovereign veto of powers, spoke about appointment and removal of governors to states, spoke about treaties and making recommendations in that regard, spoke about pre-poll and post-poll alliances leading to elections and appointment of chief ministers, most significantly recommended imposition of GST, which stands imposed today, and the consequential financial impact it would have on states to compensate them as a result of loss of revenue. So they had all that foresight. Also spoke about and recommended the farmer bills, which now stand introduced today and are the central point of discussion in various states for various reasons. Spoke about situations arising out of such situations and the supremacy of central legislations over state legislations, especially in matters in list 3 in the concurrent list of the Constitution of India. And most importantly, suggested the constitution of an interstate council. All these recommendations have mostly been implemented 10 years down the line. The report was submitted in 2010. My father, Justice Punchhi, was a very fierce sentinel and was holding the banner high and was also very, very conscious of the fact that the independence of judiciary must always be maintained and the rule of law has to be always upheld. He had widely read the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and his short and succinct judgments often quoted scriptures and extracts from all these epics. I must say that when I became a lawyer in the year 1991, I got my license to practice on the 7th of October, 1991. And I went to him to seek his blessings and I told him that, Papa, I am now a lawyer. Do you have anything to advise me? He only told me 2 things. He says, you're a 4th generation lawyer. Your great-grandfather was a lawyer, a Mufassal lawyer in Pakistan. Your grandfather was a lawyer in Firozpur. Your father is a judge, and you're the 4th generation lawyer. So there is judicial blood running in your veins. So I don't need to tell you anything about having judicial acumen, because as time goes by, things will naturally fall into place. He told me that honesty and integrity also I need not tell you, because that also runs in your blood. He told me that dedication and hard work also I need not tell you, because that also runs in your blood. He says, therefore, I have only one piece of advice to give to you. As a lawyer, whenever anyone walks into your office, they have a problem. He's not a happy person who walks into your office. Always treat such a person with kindness and compassion, and never do anything to a client which will make him worse off when he walks out of your office. And that includes the quantum of fee which you will charge to a client. And as years go by and as you get recognized, always remember this aspect. With God's grace, I have been able to carry his advice from day one till date. I'm very grateful for all his blessings, and I'm sure today on his birthday, he's looking down upon us and showering his blessings from the higher realms in the feet of the Lord. I am extremely grateful to everyone for having joined and listened to me. I therefore thank everyone, and thank you very much, and God bless all. Over to you, Satyam.
Big thanks to you, Ashu sir, for your kind words. Now I'd like to introduce Honorable Justice N.K. Sodhi. Justice Sodhi started his schooling at St. Edward's School in Shimla in 1954 and completed his law degree from the Law College of Chandigarh. He was a faculty member of the Law Department at PU, teaching the course on industrial law and taxation for more than 13 years. He was also the editor for the Punjab and Haryana series of the Indian Law Reports. After starting his career as a promising advocate, he was appointed as the judge of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, where he served again for 13 years. Thereafter, he was appointed as the Chief Justice of the Kerala High Court, as the Chief Justice of the Karnataka High Court, and later as the presiding officer of the Securities Appellate Tribunal. In fact, I am told that Justice Punchhi worked as a junior lawyer in Justice Sodhi's father's office. Sir, I am very thankful to you for giving us your time today, and over to you, sir. Sir, if you can unmute yourself. You're still on mute, sir.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Thank you.
Can
Yes,
you
sir.
hear
Yes,
me
sir.
now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much, Satyam, for introducing me and saying all the good words about me. Mr. Justice J.S. Khehar, former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice K.T. Thomas, former Judge, Supreme Court of India, other distinguished guests who are present in this virtual meeting, members of the Punchhi family, ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely grateful to the Punchhi family and Ashu in particular for having invited me to this webinar to commemorate the birth anniversary of late Justice M.M. Punchhi. I'm not only grateful, I'm extremely happy to be here in this webinar. I'm extremely proud of the fact and indeed honored with the invite that I got from the family. My associations and my relations with the family go back to the year 1954, when I was a school-going kid. We had just shifted from Simla to Chandigarh along with the High Court. We all know that after the partition of the country, the High Court from Lahore had moved, where my father was then practicing, had moved to Simla, and we went there, and my schooling then started there in the year 1948-49. And in 1954, we shifted back to Chandigarh, and that is where, in 55, and that is when my relations with the family started Justice Punchi's father, Mr. Nandlal Punchi, was then a practicing lawyer in Firozpur, practicing mainly on the criminal side, but also on the civil side as well. He was a good friend of my father until such time, because Justice Punchi by then had completed his law from the Delhi University and had started practicing with his father in Firozpur. His father was very keen that he shifts to Chandigarh and starts practicing in the High Court. Till such time Justice Punchi came to Chandigarh, his father, Mr. Nandlal Punchi, whenever he visited Chandigarh, he came and stayed with us. He was I remember he was an early morning riser and would play his flute. And we as small school-going kids got quite fascinated, me and my sisters. And we would get around him. He would make us sit around him and he would entertain us. And with all the fondness that we had developed,
I'm sorry, sir. You seem to have been. You seem to be on mute again. If you could unmute, sir. All right.
is that all right?
Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. Please continue.
No. So Justice Punchi's father, I was saying, whenever he visited Chandigarh, till such time Justice Punchi shifted here, used to come and stay with us. And he was an early morning riser and used to play his flute. And we as small school-going kids were really fascinated. He would make us sit around him and he would entertain us. And the fondness that we developed for him, we used to call him Bansuri Wale Uncle. Then in 1958, Justice Punchi had practiced for a few years, 2 or 3 years with his father in Firozpur. He shifted to Chandigarh because his father was very keen that he moves to Chandigarh. When he came here, as Ashu pointed out, he came in the year 1958 and he started his practice in my father's chambers. My father was then a practicing lawyer and he worked with my father in his chambers for about 6 to 8 months. With the kind of talent that he had, with the kind of spark that he had, with the kind of desire that he had within him to go independent, he started his independent practice soon thereafter. And within a few years, his profession picked up. He was practicing on the civil side. He was practicing on the criminal side. He was practicing on the revenue side. He was practicing in matters relating to land reforms. He was practicing in matters dealing with land acquisition. He dealt with constitutional issues and above all, the writ jurisdiction, which in those days was still in the reformative stage. He had made a name for himself in the profession and came to be reckoned as one of the good lawyers in the bar. It was then that he was picked up by the university as a part-time faculty member of the law department. And I must tell you, these appointments in those days were quite prestigious because such appointments were made by the university in consultation with and with the approval of the then Chief Justice. So his name was approved by the Chief Justice when he went as a part-time faculty member to the university. Because of the varied experience that he had, and I personally believe teaching law, that is the best way to understand law yourself. You understand much more by teaching to others than in any other manner. So Justice Punchhi, as I said, was practicing on different fields of law, and his practice by then had further picked up. He became one of the prominent lawyers and was then appointed the standing counsel to the Chandigarh administration. This appointment again, I must say, was quite prestigious, because I don't know whether that practice still continues or not. But in those days, nobody would be appointed a standing counsel without consultation and without the approval of the Chief Justice. Chandigarh, as we all know, is a union territory. It is not a full-fledged state. We do not have an advocate general, and the counterpart of the advocate general was the standing counsel for the administration. And that is where the Chief Justice was consulted in making such appointments. Here again, Justice Punchhi's name was approved by the then Chief Justice, and he took over as the standing counsel for the Chandigarh administration, which was the counterpart of an advocate general in a particular state. He continued practicing. His practice further flourished. He argued a number of important matters, and if we were to open up the law journals, you will find he argued quite a few important cases, quite a few full benches, laying down important questions of law relating to land acquisition, relating to revenue matters, relating to land reforms, and constitutional issues as well. It was then in the year 1979. By this time, I was also a lawyer, and I was also practicing along by his side in the High Court. It was in 1979, and if I am not mistaken, our Chief Justice in the High Court was no other than Justice S.S. Sandawalia. I must tell you, friends, having known Justice Sandawalia from close quarters, I can vouchsafe that he was one of the finest Chief Justices the country has produced. Very honest, very upright, very fair, and would not recommend anyone unless he was deserving, unless he had merit in him. It was in 1979 that Chief Justice Sandawalia picked up Justice Punchhi as a practicing lawyer and recommended him for appointment to the High Court judge. He was appointed, as Ashu pointed out, he was appointed as a judge of the High Court in 1979. And I was then practicing at the bar. I can only say it was indeed a pleasure appearing before him in any matter. He was pleasant, he was cordial, and cordial to all members of the bar. Very pleasant in court. He would never shout at anyone, nor would he shut out anyone. He would give a patient hearing, and the perception of the members of the bar was that they would get a fair order, a fair deal in his court. His was one of such courts where members of the bar thought, including myself, that we will get a fair deal. a fair deal did not really mean an order in your favor. An order which was fair to the parties in the case before the court. So the members of the bar were very happy, and this is how he had endeared himself. I must also mention that as a judge of the High Court, he would encourage the youngsters. He would encourage the junior lawyers. And I've seen this happening myself, not once, but on quite a few occasions. When a young lawyer would appear before him in a case, he would point it out to him. He says, look, Mr. Counsel, from the facts of your case, this is the precise issue that arises. You have not taken up this issue in the petition. I am adjourning the matter. Please amend your petition, study this matter, and come back. He would adjourn the matter. Sorry? Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
So he would adjourn the matter, ask the young lawyer to come prepared on that issue, brought to his notice by the judge, and then dispose of the matter. Since this happened quite a few times, I did ask him once outside court. I said, sir, the members of the bar are very happy, particularly the youngsters, because of the kind of encouragement that they get from you. And you keep suggesting and pointing out to them issues that arise in the cases which may not have even occurred to them. What a wonderful reply he gave to me. He said, Navdeep, sitting there on the bench, I'm not supposed to mechanically decide a matter on the basis of the arguments advanced before me. I want to do real justice in the case. A point which has arisen, which arises from the facts of that case, but did not occur to the counsel, why should the party be made to suffer? And in the process, even the youngsters were getting educated. They would come prepared and argue the matters. So all this endeared him to the members of the bar. And I must say, I'm sure Mr. Khehar, Justice Khehar had started practicing by then and was appearing before him. He will bear me out that it was indeed a player appearing before him as a counsel. What else would a counsel want? A patient hearing? You don't want to be shouted at? And a fair order. And this is what the perception of the bar was. Therefore, we were all very happy appearing in his court. With this background, in 1979, again at a young age, he was picked up for appointment, as Ashu pointed out, he was picked up for appointment as a judge of the Supreme Court. Having been appointed there, he rendered quite a few landmark judgments, including that dissenting judgment in the judge's case of 1993, in which he very boldly pointed out that the institution of the Chief Justice, as contemplated by the Constitution, does not leave any scope for plurality of judges. What he said was that the Chief Justice, the institution of the Chief Justice, was in his individual capacity, and he alone had to be consulted. He went on to observe in his dissenting judgment, I'm making a passing reference to this judgment because I also happen to have the same views, but that's a different issue. He also observed in the judgment, if we start expanding the consultancy process and bring in more judges in the consultative process, the executive too will try to expand itself and trespass into the field of the appointment of judges, and the primacy of the Chief Justice will be withered. What he said in 1993 came out to be true. A few years back only, we saw the NJAC Act being enacted. The NJAC Commission being appointed and replacing the collegium system in the matter of appointment of judges. That has been struck down. And we have the collegium system in place. Whether the collegium system should continue or whether there should be something else that should come and replace the system, and what that should be is a subject of debate elsewhere and not in today's forum. Not only this, but he also delivered quite a few landmark judgments in the field of land acquisition, even in matrimonial matters. Some of his judgments are being quoted day in and day out. If we open up the law journals, they will bear testimony to the fact and will tell us the kind of talent, the kind of intellect, and the kind of interest that he had in different fields of law. His illustrious career came to an end when he retired from the Supreme Court in October 1998. Am I right, Ashu? He retired in October 1998.
That's correct. That's correct.
Even after retirement, the government of India did not want to waste his talent. As Ashu pointed out, despite the fact that we had the Sarkaria Commission's report, which had been given long years back, the government of the day set up a very high-level commission, chaired by Justice Punchhi, with other legal luminaries, more particularly late Mr. Madhav Menon, whom I had the occasion of meeting on one or two occasions when I was the Chief Justice in Kerala High Court. They deliberated on center-state relations. They focused on various aspects. Ashu has pointed out some of them. Most of the recommendations, or rather quite a few of the recommendations, were accepted. There were some other recommendations made by this high-level commission to prevent the caste-based and the religion-based disturbances that we see happening day in and day out. Had the recommendations made by the commission been accepted, or rather implemented, we would not have been seeing such problems in society. He did a yeoman's service in making such recommendations, and the government of the day would be well advised to implement the remaining suggestions and recommendations that this high-level committee had made. Without delving any further, I hope I have not taken more than 10 minutes because I was told the time was limited. And with these words, I would like to conclude and once again thank Ashu and other members and Satyam and other members of the family for having given me an opportunity to be present in this webinar, be present with the virtual gathering today, and for having said a few words about Justice Punchhi, with whom I have had very long and old associations. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. I think the pleasure is entirely ours for having you over here. Thank you so much for sharing all those beautiful memories. So next, I would like to introduce Honorable Justice K.T. Thomas. Justice K.T. Thomas enrolled as an advocate in 1960 and started his career at Kottayam as a junior advocate to Joseph Malaikal, a leading lawyer of those days. In 1977, he was directly selected as the district and sessions judge, securing the first rank in the selection tests. He was then appointed as the judge of the High Court of Kerala in 1985 and served as the acting Chief Justice of the Kerala High Court in 1995. In 1996, he was appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court, and at the pinnacle of his career, he presided the Supreme Court bench that confirmed the death sentence in the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case. I am sure that he would have many memories with Justice Punchhi to share with us, and without taking more time, so please
Can you hear me now?
unmute yourself. You're on mute still. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Shall I start?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Chief Justice Khehar, Justice Sodhi, Ashu, Pavan, members of the family of Justice Punchhi, and all the listeners. May I start by paying pranam to the memory of the great jurist and judge, Justice Madan Mohan Punchhi, whose memory still remains in sterling manner in my mind. I feel jealous that Justice Punchhi, when Ashu narrated the way he reached the legal profession, is through a galaxy of his predecessors in the family. In my case, I cannot make any such claim, as none in my family previous to my joining legal profession had ever been in that profession, because my father was a merchant. His father, I have not seen him, would not have been either a merchant or a lawyer or anything like that. But when I started, it so happened that from me onwards, now 3 generations are in the legal profession. And I am showing the latest photo where I am sitting with my son, who is now a judge of the Kerala High Court, Justice Becchu Kurian Thomas, and his daughter, who is in the legal profession now, probably, as Ashu said now about his father, in a future time, my children and grandchildren would be able to speak about me. Remembering Justice Punchhi is a matter of great joy for me, because until I became a judge for the Supreme Court of India, I had no occasion to get acquainted with him. But the day I became a judge of the Supreme Court, I don't know how, in what way, we came so close together. One from hailing from Punjab, the other from the southernmost state in India, Kerala. And apart from that, I belong to a totally different language. I belong to a totally different community, a totally different religion, a totally different background. With all that, the relationship between me and Punchhi became very, very close and acute. It was so fortunate that when I reached the Supreme Court in 1996 March, the next week onwards, the then Chief Justice of India allotted me as a benchmate of Justice Punchhi. I had the fortune to put as his benchmate within 1 week of my joining the Supreme Court. That gave me the occasion to develop personal intimacy with him. We remained as benchmate in successive periods. When he became Chief Justice of India, he chose me as his benchmate. In the court of the Chief Justice of India, as Justice Khehar knows, normally the three judges are sitting together. And I was invariably one of the three judges in the CJI court when Chief Justice of India seat was adorned by Justice Punchhi. That may be the exhibition of his confidence in me, and it thrilled me very much. I continued as his benchmate until his retirement, even the last day of his judicial career on the bench, I was his benchmate. He was a bar-friendly judge. Both juniors and seniors liked him. Without any exaggeration, I can call him as a darling of the junior section of the bar. Because of the major chunk of the bar was with him in all thick and thin. Some of the detractors of Justice Punchhi could not touch him because the bar was in full support of him. He was therefore a bar-friendly judge. He also reposed confidence in the sense of justice of some of his colleagues, particularly. I heard reports of his judgeship in the Punjab and Haryana High Court, and reference had been made to that aspect by Justice Sodhi now. During the militancy period, when the Khalistan supporters became militants, Justice Punchhi boldly decided cases involving militants, even though he became a target and his security cover had to be tightened very much. He never bothered, he never detracted from what he should do as a judge. He showed me his fingers once, and one of the fingers was missing. And he narrated how it happened, because he was a target in an attack on him, and he narrowly escaped as it hit on his finger only. He was a fearless judge, and hence the cases he decided while granting bail, he never granted bail to militants. That is how the militancy became inimical to him. But on the contrary, he never desisted from granting bail to the accused. As a policy, he used to grant bail. Bail was his condition first, and denial was only an exception. He was remarkably efficient in dealing with criminal cases. As his benchmate, I often noticed how he grasped very quickly the facts of the cases. He did not flinch to grant relief whenever he felt that it is needed for the cause of justice. He overlooked technical defects for advancement of justice. That is the virtue of a very good judge. You may remember the TMFI case. When it reached 11-judge bench, the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Ahmadi, who was about to retire, chose him to head that lengthy bench. I was also included as one of the judges of that lengthy bench. We heard arguments for a very long time, and we were about to conclude the arguments. Very unfortunately, one of the judges had to take leave on account of serious ailment, and later he retired. The lengthy bench was not reconstituted thereafter until the retirement of all the other judges who were included in that bench first. As I too was one of the judges of the bench, I could realize how a majority view was getting crystallized eventually. He and I shared the same view, but no matter repeating about that now because it did not fructify at all. Had it fructified, I would quote Justice Palias Nariman recently in his book that the things would have been different now. One of the cases during my early period in the Supreme Court was heard by me and Justice Punchhi when he was heading the bench. I shall mention the name of the case because of the peculiarity of that case. It is Satish Mahara versus Delhi administration. During my early period, 1996, it was a case where a wife alleged that her husband, Satish Mahara, sexually molested their 3-year-old child. When the case was charge sheeted by the police, the matter should normally be dealt with by the Sessions Court as a practice. But when we both went through the writ petition filed by the father, Satish Mahara, we wanted to give a full hearing of that case in the Supreme Court itself as an SLP. When we heard the case, we thought it will be a negation of justice by directing this father to undergo or the ordeal of a long drawn trial in the Sessions Court, then probably an appeal in the High Court, then probably an appeal in the Supreme Court. We felt that it is a concocted case against him. We had so many materials to reach that conclusion. He did not either. He told me that, Justice Thomas, if you are convinced, I said, I am convinced, then we need not even direct him to undergo the judgment. I am not repeating the facts of the case because it has now been reported in the 1996 Law Journal as Satish Mahara versus Delhi administration. I request my hearers to find time to go through that to the judgment. He wanted me to write the judgment. I wrote the judgment. He entirely agreed with me. It shows that how the POSCO, the Protection of the Children, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, could be abused also. To what extent against a father by a wife. I am not mentioning other details because I told you that the details can be gathered from the reported decision. Another case of importance concerns the validity of the decision of the Speaker in UP Assembly. When 23 MLAs, if I remember correct, were alleged to have defected from one party to another, in the CJI court, when I sat with him and Justice Srinivasan, who was a judge of the Madras High Court, who unfortunately he died in harness as a judge of the Supreme Court of India. We, in a separate cover, wanted the Speaker to take a vote of all the members of the Legislative Assembly and keep away the 23 votes separately. If majority could be obtained without the 23, then we thought the Chief Minister can be allowed to continue. The Chief Minister at that time was one Jagadambika Pal for a short period. We found that he did not command the majority and therefore he had to resign. Kalyan Singh became Chief Justice next. Then Mayawati, the Supreme Leader of the BSP, moved the Supreme Court that her petition concerning the defection of the 23 should be taken up. Normally, no speaker will abide by the direction of the Supreme Court, but this became an exception where the speaker also wanted to stand by the Supreme Court decision because that would help him. And eventually, the case was considered, and Srinivasan took a view that the defected MLAs are not liable to be disqualified. I differed from Srinivasan. I wrote a detailed judgment that they are liable to be, I'm sorry, Srinivasan took the view that the so-called defection will not affect their disqualification. I said, no, it will affect. Ultimately, the matter had to be decided by Justice Punchhi because he is the third judge. Justice Punchhi said, in view of the cleavage or the opinion of my brethren, I deem it necessary to refer this question to a larger bench of 5 judges. I don't know whether any such larger bench could be constituted thereafter. The successive Chief Justices found it difficult because it was not the decision of the bench. It was the decision of Chief Justice of India. By that time, the matter had to be taken up on the judicial side, whether the reference should be made into an order of the court. The situation changed in UP Assembly and therefore it became infructuous. That is what happened. I wish to mention one more thing. When Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, reference was made to that case. Because of his confidence in me, he called me once and said, Justice Thomas, though you have not become a senior judge, I wish you to head a bench. It is a matter directly relating to 26 accused who were sentenced to be hanged by the Tada trial court. And you can tell me who or other judges must be with you because necessarily they must be junior to you. I asked him, Chief Justice, why are you saying so? He said, I want you to head the bench. And the 3-judge bench was constituted to hear that, and we completed the hearing. And the judgment had been delivered. It is a matter of history, a reported matter. The impact of that is still now continuing. Rajiv Gandhi case, because persons who are in jail, we reduced the number of conviction from 26 to 7, and the capital punishment also to 3 or 4, if I remember correct. And all of them have been, that sentence had been commuted. They are undergoing legal imprisonment now. I mentioned all these things because Justice Punchi's personal confidence in me and also some other judges was so intense that he did not detract in doing what he felt to be correct. After his retirement, he went back to Chandigarh instead of remaining in Delhi. Very rightly said about it. I asked him why you are not remaining in Delhi. He said he is more interested in farming, in agriculture. He has some land, farm. So once I went to Chandigarh and enjoyed the hospitality of him and his wife. And then he said, after lunch and after a little rest, I'll take you to my farm. He himself drove the car and took me to his farm and showed all these things. After my retirement, I also did not remain in Delhi. In spite of certain offers made to me, I was appointed on the National Human Rights Commission, but I wrote back to the Rashtrapati to permit me not to join, because I believed then and now that soon after retirement from Supreme Court, at least there must be a cooling period when the judges should not take up any assignment. So I came back in Delhi. We used to contact each other. I am very happy to mention to you that it was during that time that Pavan and his family visited us, not once but on 2 occasions. That is why I remembered how he lost his hair now. The receding hairline changed his countenance now. I am extremely happy to be invited to remember a great judge like Justice Punchi. And his grip on criminal law is amazing, marvelous. And it took only 5 minutes to grasp the facts of the case. While sitting with him, I had another advantage. He used to tell me, Thomas, this is a case where you should write the judgment. And large number of judgments I wrote, I owe to him in the Supreme Court, because he wanted me to write. And he had departed from the usual practice in the Supreme Court. Always the dictation on the bench is done by the senior judge. But Punchi invariably used to tell me, Thomas, take note that this is a case where you have to dictate. I asked him, sir, shall I take it home? And no, dictate it now. So I was emboldened. It is difficult for a junior judge to dictate in the presence of a senior judge. But I became very emboldened in dictating judges. So in that way, remembering Punchi is a matter of not only great pleasure, it is a matter of great privilege. And I remember him fondly, remember him and his family also. I thank Ashu for giving me this very rare opportunity to share my thoughts with the family and other members, and also in memory of great Judge Justice Madan Mohan Punchi. Thank you very much.
I think your talk today would certainly inspire all the young advocates, especially the judgments that you shared with us and the confidence that Justice Punchi exhibited by your talk, sir. I thank you so much for your kind words. Now, I'd like to call upon my sister, Saishruti Mutneja, who herself is a licensed attorney in California. I request her to introduce the keynote speaker for today, the former Honorable Chief Justice of India, Justice J.S. Khehar. Over to you, Saishruti.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Nana's birth anniversary. My name is Saishruti Mutneja. I'm a 5th-generation lawyer in India and a practicing attorney in the state of California in the US. we're here to celebrate my grandfather, Justice M.M. Punchhi, the 28th Chief Justice of India. To be honest with you, I'm really glad this is happening online and not in person, because if it was happening in person, I would never be able to attend this. So good for me. When we're describing a person of great stature like my grandfather, people often tell stories of how he rose to power and moments where he shone and the impact he left on the world. But for me, Nana wasn't a great person. He was just Nana. He was just the man who told us stories, and he took us to India Gate, and he just took us out. He was just our grandfather. Of course, being the man that he was and the position that he was in, it required him to carry a gunman with him, and he had a driver, and he had all the frills and fancies that come with being the Chief Justice. But we didn't see all of that. We just saw the man that we could run to when we wanted to hide from our parents. But it was only the first time I realized his value and the enormity of his stature when I was at the age of 18. It was the day before I was joining law school in India. I went to Nana to say goodbye because my law school was close to Delhi, which was further away from home in Chandigarh. And he gave me one of his most prized memorabilia. He gave me the silver plate he received from the Lawyers Association when he was retiring from the Supreme Court of India. Unfortunately, he passed away and he never got to see me graduate. But I will always remember that moment, and I always remember him, and that influenced me to a very large extent. And I think he's one of the main reasons that I became a lawyer also. It's impacted me to such a large extent that after graduating from India, when I decided to do my master's in the US, and I came to Berkeley Law, and upon graduating from Berkeley Law, I was asked to give a speech upon my graduation. And during that speech, I mentioned Nana during that, and I dedicated my speech to him because I think he's had such a profound impact on me becoming a lawyer and being the person I am today, and hopefully he's proud of that person. And from the influence of one Chief Justice of India to the next, Justice Khehar was the 44th Chief Justice of India. And during his time at the Supreme Court, I was fortunate enough to work for Justice Khehar as his legal intern. And I was able to experience his brilliance firsthand. Justice Khehar, like my grandfather, started his career in Chandigarh at the Punjab and Haryana High Court in 1979. During his legal career, similar to Justice Punchhi, he taught at the Punjab University legal faculty. He was promoted to be a judge in the High Court in February 1999. He served as the Chief Justice of the High Court in Uttarakhand and in the state of Karnataka. And subsequently, in 2011, he was appointed to the Supreme Court of India, where he served from September 2013 until August 2017, which is when he retired. He was also appointed to be Chief Justice of India from January 2017, through August 2017. Some of his notable judgments, and it's really interesting that Justice Sodhi mentioned this some time ago. He mentioned the fact that the NJEC Act was quashed, and there's a continuation of the judicial system and it's interesting because Justice Khehar was the main judge in that judgment, and he's the one who pronounced that judgment, and he ruled for the independence of the judiciary. And amongst other notable judgments include upholding the right to privacy and striking down the triple talaq, which I think was a very big judgment for India. And in addition to that, he also ruled on the judgment where he led the bench, which gave a significant verdict in the principle of equal pay for equal work, irrespective of whether you're a daily wager or irrespective of what capacity you're working. Justice Khehar said, if you're doing the same amount of work, you're going to get the same amount of pay. And I think that's a very notable thing to do and to say, especially considering it's the 21st century. I'm going to leave it to you, Justice Khehar.
स्क्रीन पे नहीं आ रहा.
Justice Khehar?
Yes. Am I on the screen?
Yes.
I think I'm not yet on the screen.
I think it's on gallery view mode, so I think everyone can see you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sai Shruti, for your very kind introduction. A very good afternoon to everybody. Let me first of all also thank the family of Justice Punchhi for giving me this opportunity to speak about my memories of Justice Punchhi on his 87th birth anniversary. I can't, unfortunately, speak to you like Justice Thomas did. Justice Thomas was a contemporary of Justice Punchhi, and they were in that sense equals. And I also can't speak to you in the manner that Justice Sodhi did, because hearing Justice Sodhi today, I understood that he had practiced alongside Justice Punchhi, whilst Justice Punchhi was still a lawyer in the High Court. My view of Justice Punchhi is through a prism where I'm on one side and Justice Punchhi is on the other, and we are separated by a generational gap. But all the same, I had a great relationship with Justice Punchhi. But I will not start with that relationship. I will start with when I first saw Justice Punchhi. I joined the Punjab and Haryana bar in 1979. And Justice Punchhi had a fixed place in the bar room where he would wait for his cases, and whenever his cases were called, he would go to the concerned court. And I saw Justice Punchhi walking from that seat he had in the bar room to the court many a times. And I was wonderstruck with him, for he was a very handsome man. Over the years, sometimes when his wife was in a great mood, Mrs. Punchhi would agree that her husband was a very handsome man. He was always immaculately dressed. He was fair. He was elegant. He was dignified. And when I saw him for the first time, not knowing him, but I just saw him for the first time, I felt that he had an air of aloofness about him. And I felt in my mind that this man is an introvert. After I came to know of him over the years, I knew he was a great introvert, just like me. But I didn't see him much in his lawyering abilities, in the sense that when I joined the bar in 1979, just a few months later, he was elevated as a judge of the High Court. So I did not really know about his lawyering capabilities, but Justice Sodhi is right in the sense that law reports are full of judgments where he had assisted the court on very, very important issues. But besides the fact that I viewed him from a distance, I can also share with you that he was the first ever sitting judge that I ever met. It so happened that my senior was busy in a case which was likely to be carried on to the next day. And he asked me to make a request to Justice Punchhi, where one of his cases was likely to come up on the next day. So I went to Justice Punchi's court. Court time was over and he had risen. And I didn't know what to do. So I told the court staff that I wanted an adjournment in that particular case, and they said they couldn't do it, but they said I could make a request to the Honorable Judge in his chambers. So a slip with my name was sent into chambers, and I was called into the chambers by Justice Punchi. And Lord and behold, I could never believe that I was speaking to the man who was destined to be the Chief Justice of India. Well, he didn't ask me why I had come, but he inquired of me about my professional background, which I said I had none. He also inquired about my family background. And then he told me that it's great memories. We're talking about memories. And then he told me that he would not send his son to the profession unless he could make 3 provisions for him. He said he would send his son to the profession if we could get him a telephone connection and a conveyance. In the 1970s, telephone connections were difficult to get, and so were vehicles. Number 2, he said he would send his son to the profession only if he could arrange a great accommodation for him for at least 7 years. And then he said, number 3, he would send his son to the profession only if he could give him out-of-pocket expenses. I may be wrong in what I remember, but I think he said 7,000 rupees, which was good in those times. That was the first fatherly professional advice I ever got in my life. It relaxed me down. I understood that breaking even is going to take me 7 years, maybe more, because I was a first-generation lawyer. So that was my first interaction with Justice Punchi. And that was the first sitting judge I ever met. Just when I was narrating my impressions about him were not contemporary, because I didn't know him from that closeness. What I need to share with you is that we were separated from one another in almost everything by 2 decades, 20 years. Justice Punchi was born in 1933. I was born 19 years later in 1952. Justice Punchi joined the bar at the Punjab and Haryana High Court in 1958. I joined it 21 years later in 1979. Justice Punchi became a judge of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in 1979. I became a judge 20 years later in 1999. Justice Punchi came to the Supreme Court in 1989. I went to the Supreme Court 22 years later in 2017. Justice Punchi became the Chief Justice of India in 1998. I became the Chief Justice of India 19 years later in 2017. So my memories of Justice Punchi are not from an equal pedestal. I always looked up to him. A person lower looking at a person in a superior position. But I have great memories of him because I watched him very closely because of my respect and admiration of his style of functioning. Every lawyer understands and appreciates a judge, as my previous two speakers had said, based on how the judge behaves with him in court. It's not a question of losing a case. It's not a question of winning a case. So I will tell you my first case and how it worked out in Justice Punchhi's court. By the time I got the opportunity to argue my first case, I was already 4 years down in the profession. And I was exclusively working on the writ side, which means I was learning to interpret rules. I was learning to interpret legislation. I was intermingling the two and making out cases on the written spirit of the law. And I felt that I was pretty good at it. So in this case before Justice Punchhi, the question was appointment of a director level position. And if a lawyer gets to do that in 4 years of his career, I think it's a big break. So it was a very important case for me. And when I drafted the case, I was pretty sure, because the interpretation of the statute, which was a central enactment, was, according to me, very simple and straightforward. The counsel opposite was Mr. Kuldeep Singh. He was then senior standing counsel for the Union of India, which position is now designated as either Assistant Solicitor General or Additional Solicitor General. This is the same Mr. Kuldeep Singh who was elevated directly as a judge of the Supreme Court from the bar. So he was my opposite counsel, and I was not really worried because I was so sure of myself. So I argued the case before Justice Punchhi, and he heard me very patiently, very politely, and gave me the opportunity to show how the provision needed to be interpreted. He then heard Justice Mr. Kuldeep Singh, and Mr. Kuldeep Singh interpreted the provision very differently. When I was hearing Mr. Kuldeep Singh, I felt that maybe he wasn't right, and I'm going to get it. Judgment was reserved. It came after a little while. My client lost the case. I read that judgment over and over again. Justice Punchhi did not accept my interpretation of the provision. Reading that judgment, I felt that maybe Mr. Kuldeep Singh had a point, and maybe he was right. But Justice Punchhi didn't accept his interpretation either. Justice Punchhi interpreted the provision harmoniously, giving it meaning based on the other surrounding sections of the enactment, not just that section. And that was the brilliance of the man, who was not a service law expert, who had probably seen that provision for the first time ever in his life, and who had the capacity to bring out an interpretation that neither of us could arrive at. But there was a great learning for me in that judgment, in the sense that I understood that a casual look at a provision could never be converted into success. I understood that a more concentrated examination of both your facts and your law needed to be the hallmark of your success if you needed to succeed. But that's my experience of Justice Punchhi in my first case before him. The last case I did before Justice Punchhi was when he was in the Supreme Court and Justice Thomas was sitting with him. And Justice Thomas wrote the judgment. We'll not go into that. By the time much water had flown. But coming back to my memories of Justice Punchhi. In my private interactions with Justice Punchhi, he was the one who did the talking. And I was the one who did the listening. Not because he was such a big judge, not because he was so much older to me, because his assessment of things were different from others. His perception was very different. And I would grant him that because he suffered migration from Pakistan to India, from Pakpatan to Firozpur at the time of partition. And that's a disastrous experience for anybody at any age. And therefore, his narratives were based on his understanding of historical truths. And his narratives were based on his understanding of societal truths. And it was a great learning listening to him. I had the privilege to listen to him because we were both introverts and we got along quite well with one another. And others didn't have that opportunity because he didn't speak to others. But what I understood from our conversations was that he had a great philosophical thought. His thought was very, very simple. He was God-fearing. He believed in destiny. He believed in divinity. He was a great disciple of Sri Satya Sai Baba. He had all that about him. And I can explain to you his simplicity from one occasion that I had to appear before him, to speak to him. I was in Delhi and I rang him up to ask him if I could come and meet him. He permitted me to come. So I went to his house and we were sitting in his backyard in the veranda. And an eagle swooped down and carried away one of his domesticated hens. And he said to me, "What's the power of a Supreme Court judge who cannot even protect his hen?" So that's what Justice Punchhi was all about. Simplicity, straightforwardness, divinity, a believer, not only in God, but also in destiny. As judges in the Supreme Court, all of us have occasions to write large number of judgments. And in terms of Article 141, every judgment we write is a declaration of law. And Justice Punchhi wrote extremely large number of judgments. And he pushed the barriers in a lot of fields of law. Most particularly, as was pointed out before me, in criminal law, in land acquisition, in Motor Vehicles Act, in females' right to inheritance, in the right of maintenance of women, and a host of other things. But what I wish to talk to you today about is a judgment which Justice Sodhi had a passing reference to. Before I talk about the judgment, let me preface it with something so that we can all be on the same page. Whenever a judgment is written and an opinion is expressed, there's no question of being right or wrong. That question doesn't arise for consideration. If a 5 judges bench has a split verdict of 3:2, it's not that 3 are right and 2 are wrong. That never arises. That's never the case. Concurrent judgments are years later set aside. It's not because the first concurrent judgment was wrong and the later judgment is right. So it's never a question of right and wrong. So we are not going to go into the question of right and wrong. The second thing that I want to preface before talking about this very vital judgment is that before a judge assumes office, he takes an oath. He takes an oath to bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. That's one part of the oath. He also takes an oath to faithfully and to the best of his ability, judgment, and knowledge decide all cases without fear and favor. So he owes his allegiance to the Constitution and he swears, I will decide it as I understand it without fear or favor. And any judge of any constitutional court who abides by this rule is a great judge, is a judge who needs to be applauded. The pressures of deciding cases in the Supreme Court are so enormous because of the sensitivity of the issues involved that it needs a lot of courage and grit to stand by your ideals as also to stand by the Constitution. So now let's talk about the judgment. Well, the controversy in the matter of appointment of judges to constitutional courts, namely all the high courts and the Supreme Court, and the question of transfer of judges came to be adjudicated for the first time by the Supreme Court in SP Gupta versus Union of India. This is a 1981 judgment. And the pressures, I can tell you, are so enormous because I decided NJAC and I know what kind of pressures that work on you. Not because anybody else pressurizes, not because the press says so many things, because of the pressure within you to be able to do the right thing, to be able to understand the proposition correctly, and to write something that makes sense. This judgment was delivered in 1993 by the 9 judges. Justice Punchhi's judgment narrates that when hearing in this matter concluded, the Supreme Court stopped functioning on account of summer vacation. His judgment also notices the fact that after the hearings were completed, there was no discussion by the judges on the propositions that were canvassed before the court. And it also emerges from Justice Punchhi's judgment that one opinion was delivered and circulated to all judges on the bench during the vacation. And that opinion was supported by 4 judges. So in a sense of understanding, 5 judges agreed with the opinion that was circulated. With the passage of time, 2 further judges wrote their own opinions, supporting the same opinion. So we understand that 7 out of 9 judges were of one considered opinion. And what was that opinion? That opinion accepted the primacy of the Chief Justice in matters pertaining to appointments and transfers, subject to the consultation of a collegium. In a matter of understanding, if the collegium was not consulted in terms of their judgment, the recommendation made by the Chief Justice was not proper. When Justice Punchhi wrote his opinion, he started by saying, this opinion is in the nature of an epilogue. A fait accompli. 7 judges have already expressed their view. What is there for me to say? He said that it seemed it was like writing a postscript. But then, let me quote to you a very simple sentence that he uses in his judgment. He says, I feel it would be a dereliction to withhold contributing and leaving unsaid what needs to be said. Such a philosophical thought. It is, I must do my duty. I must say what I need to say. I don't want to leave it unsaid. And in discharging that obligation, what did he do? He said, I don't find the word collegium in the Constitution of India. The collegium word is not there in the Constitution. I am the Chief Justice of India. Sorry, he wasn't there. The Chief Justice of India is to be consulted by the President. The primacy with reference to that consultation is with the Chief Justice of India and not with the Chief Justice of India in consultation with the collegium. And that's his judgment. It was a dissent. 2:7. But let's understand this judgment from his perspective. Did he discharge his responsibility by bearing true faith and allegiance to the Constitution? He understood the Constitution as he understood it. And he understood that the Constitution did not use the word collegium. And he felt that the use of the word collegium and the introduction of collegium into a process of appointment of judges to constitutional courts was extraneous. That's his view. Right or wrong is not the question. Did he do his job to the best of his ability, faithfully? Did he do it without fear or favor? Sure. He stood up to 7 opinions to the contrary. He did his job in true allegiance to the Constitution of India. And he did his job, even though he knew it was a minority view, without fear or favor. And I think to be able to stand up, to do what he did, needs to be applauded, needs to be remembered, needs to be cherished. It doesn't matter. No view is right or wrong. It's a view expressed, and there is never a right or wrong. Why does the majority prevail? Only because the Constitution says if there is a dissent, then whatever view is expressed by more judges than others will prevail. But that doesn't mean that's right or wrong. So that is my great memory of Justice Punchhi's abilities and grit and strength and determination. So, having spoken about this very important judgment in his life, which had a great bearing when he became the Chief Justice of India 5 years later, in the sense that he still continued to support the fact that the collegium system is not provided for under the Constitution. And in his turmoil with the authorities at that time, the law ministry, who wanted him to go by the 1993 judgment. It's a beautiful sentence in a letter that he wrote to them. He said, when they said that he should follow the practice which his predecessor was following, he said, in a very short reply to the law minister, that a single swallow doesn't make a summer. Just see the man, just see the capacity of the man, just see his philosophical thought, just see his understanding of his rights and in pushing them. But when he was Chief Justice of India, in order to not carry out the recommendations made by him, a presidential reference was made in 1998. Justice Punchhi was Chief Justice of India. He constituted a 9-judges bench to hear the presidential reference. And look at his capacity. He constituted the bench by not including himself in the bench. He could have himself decided. It was not his personal case. And he could have put on the bench like-minded thoughts, but he didn't. That was the courage of conviction of the man in whose memory we are talking today. a great legal luminary, a great thought, a man who needs to be cherished and who is cherished. And it's not that everything concluded by the time he demitted office in 1998. By the time he demitted office, all this was blown over. But nobody forgot about his legal acumen. 9 years later, after you retire and 9 years pass, you're an old person. 9 years afterwards, he was picked up to head a commission to re-examine the center-state relationship and to give a fresh look to the 1981 Sarkaria Commission report. It's been spoken about at great length today, but let me just talk about two aspects of that recommendation which are so relevant. First and foremost, he said, with respect to legislation by the Parliament on subjects included in the concurrent list of Schedule 7, that whenever the Parliament has to legislate on a concurrent item, it should consult all state governments. Because as you know, subjects which are included in the concurrent list, legislation on those subjects can be made either by the Parliament and also by the state legislatures. So just see his vision. Just if the present bills pertaining to agricultural issues, as have been passed now by the Parliament, had been passed in consultation with the state governments, it would be a different ballgame. The realities of the other side would be known to both sides, and a better picture would have emerged from such consultation. And just one more thing. He suggested the constitution of a National Integration Council. It's similar to the Homeland Security Department in the US. He suggested that this council should be constituted, and wherever there is communal violence, then a 5-member team should be constituted by the council to go to the place of violence within 2 days. See its relevance today. It's an opinion given a decade ago. But see its relevance today. All that communal violence that is going on in the country would have been suitably dealt with if the recommendations made by Justice Punchhi had been considered favorably. You know, when a man travels from Pakpatan in Pakistan to the Supreme Court of India, every bit of his life is a story in itself. Every bit of his life needs hours and hours to talk about. But in today's webinar, there is a limited time. And I believe we have dealt with a lot of our memories of Justice Punchhi. I would, while concluding, like to thank once again the organizers of the webinar, Justice Punchi's family for giving me this great opportunity to speak to all of you and to the audience that must have heard us today. I'm really grateful to you, and I am really grateful for your patience in hearing me out today. Thank you very much.
Sir, I think your writ example is definitely going to propel some of the young advocates to review their drafts that they've recently made today. So, sir, I thank you for that. In fact, like Sai Shruti, I do have the opportunity to intern with you when I think you were in the process of penning down the triple talaq judgment. And sir, I must admit that it was a brilliant opportunity. And I even remember that you were kind enough to discuss a few papers that I was writing at the time. So, sir, I thank you for your presence here today and the opportunities that you have given us. Moving on to the last segment of the program, I would like to now invite the son-in-law of Justice Punchhi, Shri Pavan Kumar Mutneja, a practicing advocate at the High Court, having an exceptional record in the field of labor law and a flourishing practice of 35 years, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks and conclude today's program.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Well, vote of thanks and a few words by myself. Justice Khehar, Chief Justice Khehar, you have, I mean, I've been sitting and listening to your comments. All I can say is your inference of the judgment was par excellence. I just can't think of anything else except the last words which Justice Punchhi had written in that judgment of his. Is it worth it? Justice Thomas, you've been a friend to my father-in-law. He loved you and he really abided by your opinion. Whenever he had a problem, he would look towards you. And the same sentiment you have shown in the present talk. Justice Sodhi, he started his career in your office, that time, of course, your father's office, but continued and remained friends with you all along. He looked up to you, the sentiment of which you have displayed just now. More than this, I'd like to make a confession today. I chose my wife without meeting or talking to her. It was the kindness and perfect manners of her father, Justice Punchhi, that impacted me. Noticing a dab of grease on his coat when we met, I offered him a towel to wipe it off. And in a very soft voice, he said, the towel will get spoiled. Please give me a tissue. Instantly, I remember thinking, what a wonderful man he was in solving his problems. His immense regard for the person and property of the other man. That moment, I found a friend, philosopher, guide, and in relationship, he became my father-in-law. The next 28 years provided me the luxury to study an affectionate man, thoughtful, sincere, and humane. Never did I see him lose his anger or remark against a person personally. Yes, he had his problems, but the solution always lay in understanding the circumstances and the compulsion of the other person, providing a soothing balm by his conduct and manners. His empathy was summarized in his own words. He said, I quote, when a man shoots more than one bird with a single shot, everyone applauds the man. But does anyone ask the bird the torture it endured? Well, I would be that person to ask. Well, kindness and gratitude ferment in strange ways. Though expressed simply, they spread joy at the very anvil. For his oath ceremony as Chief Justice of India, he took Justice Thomas's help in locating Sister Declan of 60 years back in a convent in Ernakulam. He had her flown in for his oath ceremony. And Sister Declan, true to her form, after his oath ceremony, caught him by his little finger and marched him up to the President of India and proudly asked him to introduce her to the first citizen of the country. As a person, Justice Punchhi always stressed on the original thought. Justice Khehar has expounded on it, but I'll just make a brief mention out there. In one of those days, I intelligently quoted, "Dad, I beg to differ." His immediate retort was, "Son, why do you beg? It's your right." He always remained generous, gracious, kind, with a sense of humor which left you in splits of laughter. No wonder when a person asked him, "Sir, how much do you weigh?" With a twinkle in his eye, his response was, "Not much. I weigh 1 man and 80 kilos. Besides his many achievements as Chief Justice of India or as Chairman of the Commission of Center-State Relations, Justice Punchhi was intrinsically a family man. In any family gathering, his anecdotes, his mimicry, his understanding of the local dialects immediately reverted him to the pristine position of a master entertainer. He could sing melodiously. He was an excellent cook, a perfect host. With children, he was a child. Sai Shruti just mentioned a little about him, that he was Nana to us. He took us to India Gate. Well, I remember as Chief Justice of India, he took a momentary digression from his routine and caught the hands of his grandchildren and reverted in circles while singing "Ringa Ringa Roses," much to the amusement of the Supreme Court staff. He loved farming. He loved his cows. It was fascinating to see how these mute creatures understood him implicitly. There was never any shortage of butter. As Justice Jawaharlal Gupta, former Chief Justice of the Kerala High Court, wrote, "I had to dive through layers of butter to reach the first vegetable." Justice Punchhi lived to be 80 years. We had the privilege of hearing 3 wonderful people who enriched life and were proud to call him. 80 years he lived, but the 1 month that he talked about, that was left to be lived after him. The man without his persona is the heaviest at all times. I thank all the speakers who shared their experiences and helped us lighten that 1 month. Thank you very much. I would also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Sanjay Tandon, his second son-in-law, who conceived of this idea and kept after us till it fructified. And then he got his team in who did all the work. I thank all of them. And thank you for the children, the grandchildren in the family who joined in. Of course, there were others who worked behind the screens. And I also thank Amit Punchhi, who in Bombay could not join us on the stage, but I can imagine his loss at not being present on the scene. Thank you very much for a wonderful and entertaining webinar. Satyam.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great opportunity for us hosting you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.